U.S. aviation authorities are investigating another questionable landing involving an Air Canada plane at the San Francisco airport. This is the second incident in several months, with the latest mix-up on Sunday night. Arthi Pohl is tracking this story. So, Arthi, what went wrong?
So this was around 9 p.m. on Sunday evening that there was an Air Canada flight that was leaving from Montreal and set to land at San Francisco's airport, SFO. So this was flight 781, and it was initially cleared to land on runway 28R. Now, this was probably a good duration of time before the actual landing. Then it turned out that air traffic control said that they were fearful that the preceding flight, a different United flight, wouldn't have cleared the runway in time. So they repeatedly asked the Air Canada pilot to go around, not to land, that it was not cleared for landing anymore, that it needed to go around until the runway was fully clear to make sure that it was safe. This is an excerpt of the communication with air traffic control. Take a listen.
Canada 781 go around. Canada 781 go around. Air Canada 781 go around. Canada 781 go around. Canada 781 go around.
So you can see there that it was actually about half a dozen times that you heard air traffic control request the flight 781, the Air Canada flight, to go around, and there was no response. And then following, there was one communication that said, hey, there seems to be a problem with our radio, and that was from Air Canada, and air traffic control said, yes, that's evident. What they did when they couldn't communicate through radio is, in fact, they used one of the backup systems that they have, which is to flash red lights to the aircraft to ensure that it sees that it's not safe to land. Still, even that warning was not heeded. The good news is that around 9:30 p.m., the Air Canada flight did land safely, but clearly this is why it's under investigation, because that could have been catastrophic, Andrew.
And so what have we heard from Air Canada so far?
Well, we know that the FAA is investigating, and so is Air Canada. About the communication error, here is what Air Canada had to say in a statement that they've sent to CBC News, saying Air Canada flight AC781, an Airbus A320, was traveling from Montreal to San Francisco on the evening of October 22nd. After receiving proper clearance to land, it proceeded to do so and landed normally. Upon landing, the crew was informed the tower had attempted unsuccessfully to contact the aircraft. However, the message was not received by the crew. Air Canada is investigating the circumstances. And we've mentioned before, Andrew, you and I have talked about the fact that this has happened before. Back in July, Air Canada was also in the hot seat when one of their aircraft actually began its landing on a taxiway at SFO instead of on the runway. The problem there as well was there were 4 full aircrafts that were lined up waiting to depart on that taxiway. And essentially, this Air Canada aircraft was headed directly for these 4 aircraft full of passengers. And it came within 18 meters of there being another catastrophic collision. So that investigation is also underway. And this is a second one now involving Air Canada and San Francisco's International Airport.
All right, Arthi, thank you.
You're welcome.
For more on this, I'm joined by Arthur Rosenberg. He is an aviation lawyer and a former pilot. So, Arthur, this is the second near-miss Air Canada incident at San Francisco Airport in just a matter of months. What do you think is going on here?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question. But let me just start out with this. The playing of the tapes in the setup spots before I came on by air traffic control to the Air Canada flight crew of Flight 781 is really very telling. The air traffic controller's voice was almost panicked, telling the flight to go around 6 times. Now, let me just back up. From the very first time a pilot enters a cockpit, they are almost taught that when air traffic control tells you to do something, you do it now, unless the safety of the aircraft is involved and you can't do it. So here you have a commercial airliner, an Air Canada flight on final approach to runway 28 right at San Francisco, reported 6 miles out that he were on final and they were going to land, only to have air traffic control intercede and tell them to go around. What I heard was, and again, it's a little bit of speculation because all the facts aren't out, was that now they claim that they had radio problems. Now, your listeners should know that an A320, like a Boeing 737, has 3 radios on board. Is it possible that one radio went out? Yes. Is it possible that 2? Unlikely. Is it possible that 3 went out? Almost impossible. When you don't hear a communication from air traffic control for 30 to 45 seconds when you're on final approach, you better be contacting them to find out what the hell is going on. Now, the other thing here is this use of the light gun. The controllers at the San Francisco Tower were so desperate that they reverted to something which has been going on almost since the first days of aviation, which is a light gun. Mm-hmm. You flash a red light, which is a wave off. Don't land. It's dangerous. So for this flight crew to say they didn't hear and then to say they didn't see, to me, is almost unfathomable and clearly warrants an internal investigation by Air Canada.
All right, let's play that again because we have that exchange between the cockpit and the tower. Let's have another listen.
Okay.
Canada 781, go around.
Yeah, I got 71. It's going with the radio here.
Canada 781, go around. Canada 781, go around. Canada 781, go around.
Yeah, I got 71. It's going with the radio here.
That's pretty evident. Air Canada 781.
So what did you hear? So then it was, we heard that, as you mentioned, about 6 times, and then we finally hear back from the Air Canada pilot saying there's a problem with the radio, and the tower saying, yeah, that's pretty evident. So what do you make of that?
I chalk that up to a CMA communication by the flight crew to air traffic control.
What does that mean?
And because cover my rear end, I think they clearly knew what was going on. And they realized what had happened, and you revert to the first thing that comes to mind, we're having radio problems. And I would be very surprised that after that airplane was looked at by the mechanics when they got on the ground, if they found any problem with those radios. Is it possible? Sure. I'd like to give the flight crew the benefit of the doubt, but here it's not just the radio communication by air traffic control. And you could hear for yourself, there was almost desperation in the voice of the controller. They used the light gun to wave them off. So I didn't hear, I didn't see. It's very difficult. The other thing, there's another point I want to make here. Take the other side of the coin here. San Francisco is a very quirky airport. You have 2 very close parallel runways, 28 left, 28 right. They're both about 2 miles long. They're almost one on top of one another. This taxiway Charlie, which is to the right, it's only 300 feet to the right of 28 right, and it looks like a runway. What has happened here since the July Air Canada incident is that pilots are no longer allowed to make visual approaches at night. And that's very important because here in this incident with 781, again, I'm speculating a little bit, but it seems like the flight crew came off the ILS, the Instrument Landing System approach, and they reverted to a visual approach. And they may have been so preoccupied trying to pick up the visual cues and the runway that they were so locked in that perhaps they didn't even hear the air traffic control communication, which in of itself is a scary thing. But when you put it all together, bottom line is there's really no excuse for this flight crew not to respond to air traffic control, not to respond to the light cues, the voice cues. And thank God they landed, and the plane that was in front of them, United, I thought it might have been a Southwest plane, had cleared the runway. Otherwise, this had the potential to be a horrible disaster.
So what do you think should happen as a former pilot? What should the next steps be? Well, to deal with this incident, but more specifically, are you suggesting there could be a problem with Air Canada pilots?
I'm suggesting that the internal protocols and procedures of Air Canada, perhaps just limited to this particular airport because of the peculiarities of San Francisco, which I talked about, really have to be looked at. And the flight crews, in my view, are smack of more training flying into and out of this airport. Every airport has some unique characteristics. I think it's a little telling that the July incident where Air Canada lined up on taxiway Charlie to the right of runway 28 right, and this incident both happened at night. And from my sources, both seem to indicate they were visual approaches after the airplanes had transitioned off the ILS into a visual approach, which is now no longer allowed if one of the other parallel runways is out. So it's a combination of new training, additional training, reinforcement of protocols and procedures, basic and in particular peculiar to this airport, need to be accomplished and done very quickly.
All right, Arthur, good to speak to you again. Thank you very much.
Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for having me.
That's Arthur Rosenberg in New York. He's an aviation lawyer and a former pilot. You're watching CBC News Network.